The OCP Critical Facilities Operations Framework. This webinar will focus on the site management process, service level management. We will start by looking at the process from an overview perspective and what it's built up of. And we will also have some lessons learned or customer experiences to help you see how this works. And we will leave you with some final notes for what to consider when working with this process. So service level management in the OCP CFOPS framework, where is that residing? Well, as I mentioned, it's part of site management, and it's the one mentioned here to the left. There is a separate webinar telling you where you can find and download this framework for free. The service level management consists of three major parts. It's the management of border lists, clarifying who is responsible for what. It's the breach and penalty management. If service levels or SLAs are breached, there should be penalties, and it's the responsibility of the service level management process to make sure that such breaches are identified and penalized according to the agreement. And the site management function will simply analyze and report service level compliance based on the monitoring process and use that here. But no one really wants to have a breach with penalty. It's always better to prevent this before it happens, and therefore you also have the near breach management, where the site management function works on trying to avoid an actual SLA breach, and that is also an important part of this process. Let me share some example on this. So here's a customer experience where the site management function identified that the key performance indicators for the environmental controls were trending towards a potential service level breach. So had these temperatures and humidity levels continued in the direction they were trending, there would be an SLA breach in the future. So the site management function launched a technical risk review of the environmental controls to see what the problem was. And what they found out was that there was a fault in the commissioning. It had been approved and it had compliance certificates and everything in place, but it was a technical mistake that had been missed during the commissioning. So a service project was planned and approved and executed on site without any problems, and it was completed before any service levels actually were breached. Another example is a site owner which had defined service levels to ensure a high quality life cycle and financial management. That means that the budget process works well and that the assets are under good control when it comes to their remaining life cycle and the cost of replacing them. So in this case, there was a monthly review of the asset list versus a random selection of assets in the live environment. So it was basically selecting a random number of assets and then validating their condition, their change-out forecasts, and the maintenance service reports that they were up to date compared to the planned maintenance for them or the corrective maintenance that had been performed. And if there were deviations between what was recorded in the asset list and the repository versus what the actual situation was, that was penalized because there was a breach of service levels. So this means that you get a good balance of making sure that doing technical on-site works is not just about managing the technology, it's also about documenting and reporting correctly what you've done to make sure that you actually have an appropriate change-out forecast and control over your assets. Some final notes on this process is that key performance indicators, KPIs, these are the parameters you use to evaluate the performance, but they don't need to have any predefined penalties. KPIs are just, let's call it measurement points, if you like. So what's the difference between service levels and KPIs then? Well, actually, service levels, the only difference between them and other KPIs is that they lead to predefined penalties if they are not fulfilled. So this means that you can have any KPI to be the base for service level. For example, you can measure the PUE, power usage effectiveness, of the critical facility. And if you measure it and report it on a regular basis or have it on a live stream in a dashboard, it is a KPI that doesn't reflect on any penalties or anything. You can simply see what is the current PUE and what is maybe the rolling 12 months PUE average and so forth. But if you add to that same KPI and say that the PUE should never be above a certain threshold, and if it is, it will cost a certain amount or it will trigger an escalation event or whatever it is, that turns the same KPI into being a service level. And you can do that with many other things. One of the examples you heard here before was the quality of the document repository for the asset list, for example. If it's not up to date, that could be penalized. That makes it a service level. Otherwise, you could just do a random sample and see, look here, the quality is not perfect. You need to focus on that, but without any penalties. Then it's a quality KPI. Hoping you will join us for other webinars regarding other processes.